Sergeant First Class Ramona O'Yelleran saw the kids stumbling before anyone else did. Private First Class Torvik had gone pale beneath his helmet, that particular shade of gray that came right before a soldier dropped. She raised her fist, and the patrol halted, 12 soldiers freezing in the dry riverbed like they had trained to do 1,000 times. "Torvik," she called out. "On me. Now." The young Minnesotan tried to straighten up, tried to pretend he was fine, but his legs betrayed him. He wobbled sideways, and Ramona was already moving, catching him before he hit the rocks. She dragged him to the shadow of the wadi wall, the only shade for 100 meters, and pressed her canteen to his lips. "Drink," she ordered. "All of it." She felt eyes on her back. Staff Sergeant Melick was watching from 20 meters away, arms crossed, that familiar expression of barely concealed contempt settling into his features. Let him watch. Let him judge. She had 19 soldiers who had made it home alive under her leadership, and she intended to make it 20. Before we continue with this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have military families in your area, or maybe you have seen someone look out for others the way Ramona does here. Torvik coughed, water dribbling down his chin, but color was returning to his face. The April heat in this part of Iraq could kill a man faster than any insurgent if you let it. Ramona had seen it happen. She did not intend to see it happen again. "You good?" she asked. Torvik nodded weakly. "Sorry, Sergeant. I thought I could push through." Ramona pulled a salt packet from her vest and handed it to him. "Heat does not care what you think you can do. It only cares what your body can actually handle. Drink more water. Eat that salt. We move in 5. She stood and turned to find Lieutenant Pemberton approaching, his young face creased with concern. The platoon leader was 26, West Point educated, and smart enough to know that his Sergeant First Class had more combat experience in her left hand than he had in his entire body. "How is he?" Pemberton asked. "Heat exhaustion. Caught it early. He will be fine if we keep him hydrated and slow our pace through the hottest hours." Pemberton nodded, glancing at the sky. "We're behind schedule already." "Better behind schedule than carrying a body bag, sir." The lieutenant did not argue. He had learned in his 4 months in country that Ramona O'Yelleran was usually right about things that mattered. She had a way of reading terrain, reading soldiers, reading situations that the academy had never taught him. Ramona walked back toward her position in the patrol formation, passing Melick without acknowledgement. She could feel his resentment radiating off him like the heat shimmering from the wadi floor. 3 weeks ago, the promotion board had selected her for Sergeant First Class over him. He had 12 years in the Army. She had 15. He had 3 deployments. She had 4. But none of that mattered to Melick. What mattered to him was that she had gotten the stripe he wanted, and he would never forgive her for it. Specialist Yusuf, the platoon medic, fell in a step beside her. "That was good work," he said quietly. Another 10 minutes, and Torvik would have been in serious trouble. Ramona just nodded. She did not need praise for doing her job. She needed her soldiers alive at the end of the day. The patrol resumed movement through the wadi, the dry riverbed cutting through the Iraqi landscape like a scar. The walls rose 15 feet on either side, pale stone and packed earth that had been carved by thousands of years of seasonal floods. This time of year, late April, the wadi should have been bone dry, and it was. The sand beneath their boots had not seen water in months. But Ramona kept glancing north. The clouds building over the distant mountains were not the wispy, white formations that meant nothing. They were dark, heavy, pregnant with rain. She had grown up in Houston, had seen what happened when storms dropped water faster than the ground could absorb it. Flash floods came without warning and killed without mercy. She checked her rifle, ensuring the dust had not fouled the action, and continued walking. The weapon was an extension of her body after 15 years. She could field strip it blindfolded, could clear a malfunction in seconds, could put rounds on target at 300 meters without thinking. If they hit contact out here, she would be ready. But contact was not what worried her right now. She looked north again. The clouds had grown darker in the 20 minutes since she first noticed them. Thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the mountains, so faint it might have been her imagination. "Sergeant O'Yelleran." She turned. Yusuf was watching her with curious eyes. You keep looking at those clouds, he said. Ramona considered lying, considered saying it was nothing. But Yusuf was smart, and he would figure it out eventually anyway. When I was a kid, she said, my father took me to visit family in Nigeria. We were driving through a valley when a flash flood hit. Came out of nowhere. Killed 11 people in cars ahead of us. My father had to reverse a quarter-mile uphill to escape. Yusuf absorbed this. You think those clouds are a problem? I think rain in mountains has a way of ending up in valleys. And right now, we are standing at the bottom of a very long valley. She did not say what else she was thinking. She did not mention the river crossing 2 years ago, the one that still visited her in dreams. Corporal Antoine Briggs going under, his hand reaching up, her screaming his name while the current dragged him away. They never found his body. Ramona touched the small waterproof case strapped to her wrist, felt the hard edges of what was inside, and kept walking. Behind her, the sky continued to darken. The thunder was no longer her imagination, and somewhere in the mountains she could not see, rain was beginning to fall. The patrol pushed deeper into the wadi system, the walls growing taller as the riverbed narrowed. Ramona kept her eyes moving, scanning the terrain ahead, the ridgelines above, the shadows where threats might hide. But part of her attention remained fixed on the northern sky, tracking those clouds the way a hunter tracks wounded prey. Sergeant Cross fell back from his position near the front, matching pace with her. His face was weathered from 3 deployments, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a soldier who had seen enough to know what mattered and what did not. Melik is talking again, Cross said, keeping his voice low. Ramona did not break stride. Let him talk. He is saying you froze the patrol for one private with a headache. Says you were soft. Says the promotion board made a mistake. The words landed like small stones, each one carrying weight she refused to acknowledge. She had heard variations of this for 3 weeks now. The whispered campaign Melik was waging against her authority. He never said anything directly to her face, never gave her something concrete to address. He just dripped poison into the ears of junior soldiers and waited for it to spread. What do you think? She asked Cross. The sergeant shrugged. I think Torvik would have collapsed in another 10 minutes if you had not caught it. I think that is called leadership. Ramona allowed herself a small nod of appreciation. Cross was neutral in the conflict between her and Melik, a Switzerland in the middle of their Cold War. But neutral observers could still recognize competence when they saw it. She glanced back at Torvik, who was moving better now. The color fully returned to his face. The kid caught her looking and gave a thumbs up. She turned forward without responding. Acknowledgement would only embarrass him in front of the others. The wadi curved westward, and the patrol followed the bend, boots crunching on sand and gravel that had been polished smooth by ancient waters. Ramona tried to imagine this place during flood season, tried to picture the dry bed filled with churning brown current. The walls showed the evidence if you knew where to look. Water lines stained the rock at different heights, some as high as 10 feet up. Debris wedged into cracks spoke of tremendous force, the kind of power that could sweep away anything in its path. Lieutenant Pemberton called a halt at a narrow point where the walls closed to perhaps 12 feet apart. He pulled out his map and GPS, cross-referencing their position with the mission objectives. Ramona moved to join him, leaving Cross to maintain security. We are about 2 kilometers from Checkpoint Alpha, Pemberton said. Intel wants us to confirm whether this wadi connects to the network they identified on satellite imagery. Ramona studied the map, tracing the blue dotted lines that indicated seasonal waterways. The wadi system branched like veins through the Iraqi landscape, potential highways for insurgent movement that avoided the roads where American patrols watched. Sir, she said carefully, I have concerns about continuing deeper into this terrain. Pemberton looked up. What kind of concerns? She pointed north, toward the mountains hidden beyond the wadi walls. There is weather building in the high ground. Rain in those mountains will funnel directly into this riverbed. Flash floods in terrain like this can be fatal. Melik appeared at Pemberton's shoulder, uninvited. Sergeant O'Yelleran, with respect, this is Iraq. It barely rains here. Ramona kept her eyes on the lieutenant. Barely is not never. And flash floods do not require much rain. They require rain in the wrong place at the wrong time. That place is upstream. She gestured at the sky. And that time might be today. Pemberton frowned, caught between his experienced NCO and the mission timeline. Battalion is expecting confirmation on this route by 1800. I understand, sir. I am recommending we exit the wadi now and continue the reconnaissance from the high ground. We can observe the route without being trapped inside it. Melik snorted. Trapped? Listen to yourself, Sergeant. There is not a cloud directly over us. You want to blow the timeline because of weather 50 kilometers away. Ramona finally turned to face him. In 1997, a flash flood in Antelope Canyon killed 11 hikers. The rain that caused it fell 15 miles away. They never saw a single drop before the water hit them. The two sergeants stared at each other, years of tension compressed into a single moment. Melik's jaw tightened. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. Sergeant O'Yelleran, the lieutenant said slowly, I appreciate your caution, but we have a mission to complete. He paused, searching for compromise. We will continue to checkpoint Alpha, confirm the route connection, then exit via the eastern draw. That cuts an hour off our exposure time. Will that work? It was not what she wanted, but Ramona had served long enough to know when she had pushed as far as she could push. She gave a short nod. Yes, sir, but I want to adjust our formation. Weakest swimmers near the walls where there are handholds. Pemberton blinked. Swimmers. Ramona held his gaze. Just a precaution, sir. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded. Make it happen, Sergeant. She turned away before Melik could say anything else, moving through the patrol to quietly assess each soldier. Torvik admitted he had barely passed his swim qualification. Two others expressed similar limitations. She positioned them near the wadi walls, close to exposed roots and rocky outcrops where they could find purchase if they needed to climb. Yusuf watched her work, understanding dawning in his eyes. You really think it is coming? He said. Ramona paused beside him, listening to the distant thunder that had grown slightly louder in the past 10 minutes. I think water does not care what we believe. It only cares about gravity. She checked her rifle again, a habit born from years of vigilance, and resumed her position in the formation. The patrol moved out, pushing deeper into the wadi, deeper into terrain that offered no escape if her instincts proved correct. Above them, invisible beyond the high walls, the clouds continued their slow march south. The thunder was no longer occasional. It had become a constant presence, a drumbeat announcing something that was already in motion and could not be stopped. Ramona touched the waterproof case on her wrist and kept walking. The last time she had ignored her instincts about water, she had watched a young corporal die. She would not make that mistake again. But some mistakes, she was learning, were not hers to prevent. The first drops of rain fell as the patrol reached the halfway point to checkpoint Alpha. Ramona felt them hit her helmet, light and scattered, almost gentle. She stopped and tilted her face upward, watching the gray sky that was now visible between the narrowing wadi walls. The rain was not falling hard. That was what made it so dangerous. Soldiers around her barely noticed, brushing drops from their faces like minor annoyances. They did not understand that the water hitting them meant nothing. What mattered was the water they could not see, the rain hammering the mountains somewhere to the north, gathering in 1,000 tiny streams that would merge into a single unstoppable force. Sergeant O'Yelleran. Lieutenant Pemberton had moved back to her position, his young face uncertain. This rain, should we be concerned? Ramona measured her words carefully. Sir, this rain is not the problem. The problem is what is happening upstream. Sound takes time to travel through these canyons. If there is a flood coming, we might not hear it until it is too late to react. Pemberton wiped moisture from his brow, glancing at the walls rising around them. They had entered a section where the wadi was barely 10 feet wide, the stone pressing close on either side. Even without water, the terrain felt claustrophobic. How much further to the checkpoint? The lieutenant asked. Ramona consulted her mental map of the route. About 800 meters, sir. Then another kilometer to the eastern exit. Pemberton did the math silently, his lips moving. 30 minutes. Maybe less if we push the pace. Or we turn around now, sir. We have covered enough ground to confirm the wadi is passable. Battalion does not need us to reach the exact checkpoint to validate the route. From ahead, Melik's voice carried back through the formation. Lieutenant, we are wasting time. The checkpoint is right there. Another 20 minutes, and we are done. Ramona watched Pemberton's face, watched the conflict playing out behind his eyes. He was caught between caution and mission completion, between his experienced NCO and the pressure to deliver results. She had seen lieutenants make this choice before. Some of them made it wrong and lived with the consequences. Some of them made it wrong and did not live at all. The rain intensified slightly, drops coming faster now, pattering against helmets and body armor. Still not heavy, still not the threat itself. But the thunder had grown louder, closer, a continuous rumble that vibrated through the stone walls. Sir, Ramona said, quietly, I have been in the army 15 years. I have learned to trust my gut. Right now, my gut is telling me we need to get out of this wadi. Pemberton met her eyes, and she saw something shift in his expression. Fear, maybe, or the beginning of wisdom. Before he could respond, Yusuf called out from his position near the wall. Sergeant O'Yellerin, you need to see this. Ramona moved to the medic's position, Pemberton following. Yusuf was pointing at the wadi wall, at a section of rock about chest height. There was a dark line running horizontally across the stone, a stain that marked the high point of previous floods. But that was not what had caught his attention. Above the old water line, perhaps 2 feet higher, there was debris wedged into a crack. Branches, dried vegetation, fragments of what looked like cloth. Fresh debris, deposited recently enough that the sun had not yet bleached it white. This wadi flooded recently, Yusuf said, within the last few weeks. Ramona studied the evidence, her stomach tightening. The debris was at least 8 feet above the current floor of the riverbed. A flood that reached that height would be over her head, over everyone's head, moving with enough force to tumble boulders. Lieutenant, she said, her voice carrying an edge now. We need to leave. Right now. That is not a request. Pemberton stared at the debris, his face pale beneath the desert tan. He opened his mouth to respond, but another sound cut him off. It was not thunder. It was something deeper, more sustained, like the roar of a distant aircraft engine. But there were no aircraft. The sound was coming from a north, from upstream, and it was growing louder. Everyone heard it. Soldiers froze throughout the formation, heads turning toward the source of the noise. Even Melik, 200 meters ahead, had stopped moving. Ramona did not hesitate. Get to the walls, she bellowed, her voice echoing off the stone. Find handholds. Get as high as you can. Move, move, move. The patrol erupted into motion. Soldiers scrambled toward the wadi walls, searching for roots, cracks, ledges, anything that could provide purchase. Ramona grabbed Torvik by his body armor and shoved him toward a section of wall where exposed rock created natural steps. Climb, she ordered. Do not stop until you are above that debris line. Torvik's eyes were wide with terror, but he obeyed, his boots scraping against stone as he hauled himself upward. Ramona turned to find the next soldier who needed direction, her mind running tactical calculations even as the roar grew louder. Yusuf was helping a specialist with a twisted ankle reach the wall. Cross had already scaled 6 feet and was reaching down to pull others up. Pemberton stood frozen in the middle of the riverbed, his map still in his hands, paralyzed by the sudden transformation of a routine patrol into a survival situation. Ramona sprinted to him, seized his arm, and dragged him toward the nearest wall. Climb, sir. Now, I will get the others. The lieutenant finally moved, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought had failed. Ramona spun and counted heads. 10 soldiers on the walls, or climbing. Melik was far ahead, too far, scrambling up a section of rock with desperate speed. The roar was deafening now, drowning out the shouts of soldiers, filling the wadi with sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Ramona looked north, looked up the narrow canyon toward the bend that hid whatever was coming. She had perhaps 30 seconds, maybe less, and not everyone was off the ground yet. Ramona saw Sergeant Cross lose his grip. He was 8 feet up the wall, reaching down to help a younger soldier when the rock beneath his boot crumbled. His body twisted as he fell, arms windmilling, and he hit the wadi floor hard. She heard the impact over the roar, heard the grunt of pain that followed. Cross tried to stand, and his left leg buckled. Ankle, maybe broken, definitely useless. He looked up at her with eyes that understood exactly what his injury meant. Ramona was already running. She covered the distance in seconds, hooking her arm under his shoulder and hauling him upright. He gasped at the pain, but did not scream. 15 years in the infantry had taught him how to suffer quietly. "The wall," she said. "I will boost you. I cannot climb with this leg. You do not have a choice." She dragged him to the rock face, planted her feet, and created a platform with her interlocked hands. Cross hesitated for a fraction of a second, then stepped into her grip with his good foot. She heaved upward with everything she had, lifting him high enough to grab a protruding root. He pulled, she pushed, and somehow he got his chest onto a narrow ledge 4 feet up. "Higher," Ramona shouted. "You need to go higher." Cross was already moving, using his arms to compensate for his ruined ankle, dragging himself up the wall through sheer determination. Yusuf appeared above him, reaching down, grabbing his vest, and pulling. Ramona turned to scan the riverbed. Empty. Every soldier was on the walls now, clinging to rock and root at various heights. She allowed herself one breath of relief. Then she saw the water. It came around the bend like something alive, a churning brown wall that stretched from wall to wall. 6 feet high at least, maybe more, carrying debris that tumbled in its grip. Trees, rocks, things she could not identify. The flood moved faster than a man could run, faster than she had imagined possible, and it was 40 meters away. 30 meters. 20. Ramona jumped for the wall, her fingers finding a crack in the stone, her boots scraping for purchase. She pulled herself up 1 foot, 2 feet, felt the spray hitting her back as the water closed the distance. The flood struck the wall beneath her with the force of a freight train. The impact nearly tore her loose. Water surged up the rock face, grabbing at her boots, her legs, trying to drag her down into its churning mass. She climbed with desperate strength, muscles burning, lungs screaming, and for 3 eternal seconds she was not sure she would make it. Then she was above it, 5 feet clear of the waterline, clinging to the wall while the flood raged below. She pressed her face against the cool stone and forced herself to breathe. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. Her arms trembled from exertion. But she was alive. "Sound off," she shouted, her voice barely carrying over the roar of the water. "Everyone sound off now." The responses came back, scattered and shaky, but present. Torvik, Yusuf, Pemberton, Cross. One by one, 11 voices confirmed they were still breathing. Ramona counted each one, matching names to the figures she could see clinging to the walls on both sides of the flooded wadi. 11 voices, 12 soldiers in the patrol. She counted again, her eyes moving from position to position, checking faces against the roster in her memory. Torvik on a ledge to her left. Yusuf beside Cross, still supporting the injured sergeant. Pemberton 10 feet away, pale but secure. Melik far downstream, isolated on the opposite wall. 11. Only 11. "Who is missing?" she called out. "Who do we not have?" Silence answered her, broken only by the endless thunder of the flood. Soldiers looked at each other, looked around, tried to account for the faces they could not see. Yusuf spoke first. "Specialist Brennan. He was behind me when we started climbing. I did not see him." Ramona scanned the walls again, searching for the young specialist who had been nursing a twisted ankle. The one Yusuf had been helping before the water hit. She looked at the churning brown current below, at the debris tumbling past, and felt something cold settle in her chest. "Brennan," she shouted. "Specialist Brennan, sound off." Nothing. The water continued to rage, indifferent to her call, indifferent to the soldiers pressed against the walls like insects trying to survive a storm. It had already risen another foot since hitting, the current eating at the rock just below her boots. Ramona closed her eyes and saw another face. Younger, darker skin, a smile that had disappeared beneath a different current 2 years ago. Not again. She would not let it happen again. She opened her eyes and began moving laterally along the wall, searching for any sign of the missing soldier. The handholds were treacherous, wet now from spray, and every movement risked sending her into the flood. But she kept going, kept looking, kept refusing to accept that the water had already claimed another life on her watch. Sergeant O'Yellerin. Melek's voice carried across the wadi from his position on the opposite wall. His tone had changed. The contempt was gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like respect. Downstream. I think I see something. Ramona looked where he was pointing, looked past the churning water to a point 50 meters away, where the wadi curved again. There, wedged against a pile of debris that had collected at the bend, she saw a flash of desert camouflage. Brennan was alive. For now. But the water was still rising, and she had no idea how to reach him. The debris pile holding Brennan was shifting. Ramona could see it from her position on the wall, could see the way the current tugged at the tangle of branches and wreckage that had collected at the bend. The specialist was clinging to the top of the pile, his upper body clear of the water, but the foundation beneath him was unstable. Every few seconds, a piece of debris would break free and tumble downstream, and the whole mass would shudder. He had minutes, maybe less. Ramona assessed the terrain with desperate focus. The wadi walls continued downstream, but the handholds grew sparse past her current position. The water below was moving at least 15 miles per hour, churning with debris that could break bones on impact. Swimming to Brennan was possible in theory. In practice, it was close to suicide. But watching him drown was not an option. Sergeant O'Yellerin. Lieutenant Pemberton had worked his way closer along the wall, his face tight with fear and responsibility. What do we do? Ramona did not answer immediately. She was calculating distances, current speed, the angle she would need to take to reach the debris pile without being swept past it. The math was not good. The math was terrible. But math had never stopped her before. I'm going to swim to him, she said. Pemberton's eyes widened. That is insane. The current will kill you. Maybe. But if I do nothing, it will definitely kill him. She began stripping her gear, fingers working the buckles of her body armor with practiced efficiency. The vest came off, then her helmet, then the pack that held her ammunition and supplies. She kept only her rifle, slinging it tight across her back where it would not interfere with her stroke. Yusuf called out from his position upstream. Sergeant, you cannot be serious. Let me try. I'm a stronger swimmer. Ramona paused and looked at him. Are you? The medic hesitated. He did not know about her past, about the years she had spent cutting through chlorinated water before dawn, about the scholarship offers that had evaporated when her father lost his job, and she needed to support the family. He did not know that swimming had been her first identity before the Army gave her a second one. I trained as a competitive swimmer for 8 years, she said. State champion. Almost went to Olympic trials. If anyone here can make that swim, it is me. Silence followed her words. Even Melek, far across the wadi, had nothing to say. Ramona turned back to the water, studying the current, planning her entry point. If she jumped in too far upstream, she would exhaust herself fighting to the debris pile. Too far downstream, and she would miss it entirely, swept away before she could grab hold. She found her spot, a section of wall where a slight eddy curled against the rock, a momentary break in the current that might give her the angle she needed. When I reached Brennan, she called out, I need a rope. Anything. Strip your bootlaces if you have to. Get something to me that I can use to pull us back. Soldiers began moving immediately, working together despite their precarious positions on the walls. Pemberton coordinated the effort, his command voice steadier now that he had a task to focus on. Ramona edged toward her entry point, her boots finding the last reliable handhold before the wall turned smooth. Below her, the water raged, brown and angry and hungry for anything it could claim. She thought about Corporal Briggs, thought about the river crossing in Afghanistan, the sudden surge that had caught them off guard, the way his hand had reached up through the surface one final time before disappearing forever. She had replayed that moment 10,000 times in her mind, searching for something she could have done differently, some way she could have saved him. She had never found it. The water had taken him, and there had been nothing she could do. But this was not that river. This was not that day. And Brennan was not Briggs. Ramona took 3 deep breaths, filling her lungs, oxygenating her blood the way her coach had taught her 2 decades ago. She felt her heartbeat slow, felt her muscles loosen, felt her mind narrow to a single point of focus. Then she let go of the wall and dropped into the flood. The cold hit her first, shocking despite the Iraqi heat. The mountain runoff carrying temperatures that belonged to a different climate. Then the current seized her, spinning her sideways, trying to tumble her like the debris she had watched pass minutes before. She did not fight it. Fighting the current was how people drowned. Instead, she angled her body, used the water's own force to propel her across the flow rather than against it. Her arms cut through the surface in smooth, powerful strokes, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought could not keep pace. The debris pile rushed toward her. 50 feet. 30. She could see Brennan's face now, pale with terror, his mouth open in a shout she could not hear over the roar. 20 feet. 10. A submerged branch struck her thigh, pain flaring bright and hot, but she kept swimming. 5 feet. Her hand closed around a twisted piece of metal at the edge of the debris pile, and she hauled herself up out of the main current, gasping for air she had not realized she needed. Brennan stared at her like she was a ghost. "Sergeant," he managed. "How did you?" Later, Ramona pulled herself higher onto the debris, feeling the whole mass shift beneath her weight. "We need to move. This pile is not going to hold." As if to punctuate her words, a section of branches at the base tore free and vanished downstream. The debris pile lurched, dropping 6 inches, and Brennan let out a sound that was not quite a scream. Ramona looked back toward the walls where the rest of the patrol clung to safety. They seemed impossibly far away. The current between them and the debris pile was a churning gauntlet that had nearly killed her once already. Getting here had been the easy part. Getting back was going to be something else entirely. The debris pile groaned beneath them like a wounded animal. Ramona felt it shifting, felt the subtle movements that preceded collapse. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the current dismantled their temporary refuge and sent them both into the flood with nothing to hold on to. "Brennan," she said sharply, "look at me. Not the water. Me." The specialist's eyes found hers, wild with panic but responsive. He was young, 22 maybe, on his first deployment. He had signed up expecting firefights and IEDs, the dangers they trained you for. "Nobody trained you for this." "Can you swim?" Ramona asked. Brennan shook his head. "I passed the qualification, but barely. I grew up in Arizona. We did not have water." Ramona processed this information and discarded the plan she had been forming. She could not tow a weak swimmer through that current. Not without losing him. Not without losing them both. She looked back toward the patrol, toward the soldiers clinging to the wadi walls 60 meters upstream. Pemberton was shouting something, but his words dissolved in the roar of the flood. She saw movement, saw figures working together, and then something flew through the air toward her. The rope fell short by 20 feet, splashing into the current and disappearing downstream. A second attempt followed moments later. This one came closer, but still not close enough, the makeshift line of knotted bootlaces and gear straps lacking the weight to fight the wind. Ramona watched the rope vanish and understood they were on their own. "New plan," she said, turning back to Brennan. "The walls are too far upstream. But downstream, about 40 meters, the wadi narrows again. The current will push us there whether we want it to or not. When we hit the narrows, there will be handholds. That is where we grab on." Brennan stared at her. "You want us to ride the flood. I want us to survive the flood. There is a difference." She unslung her rifle and checked it quickly. Water had not reached the action yet. The weapon was still functional, still the tool she had carried through 4 deployments and countless firefights. Losing it would feel like losing a limb, but she would lose far more than that if she did not focus on what mattered. "When we go in," she told Brennan, "you hold on to me. You wrap your arms around my chest from behind, and you do not let go no matter what. I will do the swimming. I will do the steering. Your only job is to hold on. Understand? Brennan nodded, his jaw tight. The debris pile lurched again, dropping another foot. Water surged over the lower sections, soaking Ramona's boots, climbing toward her knees. They were out of time. Now, she said. We go now. She grabbed Brennan's arm and pulled him with her as she slid off the debris pile into the flood. The current caught them immediately, spinning them, trying to separate them. Brennan's arms locked around her chest, so tight she could barely breathe, but she did not tell him to loosen his grip. Ramona kicked hard, angling toward the center of the flow where the current was fastest. It felt wrong, felt like surrendering to the thing that was trying to kill them, but speed was their only advantage now. The faster they moved, the sooner they reached the narrows. Debris hammered against her legs. A branch caught her shoulder and spun her sideways before she could correct. Water splashed in her face, into her mouth, tasting of mud and mountain and something metallic she did not want to identify. She spat and kept swimming, kept fighting to maintain their angle. The wadi walls blurred past. 30 meters to the narrows. 20. Then she saw the rock. It jutted from the water like a fist, directly in their path, the current piling against its upstream face in a churning wave. If they hit it straight on at this speed, bones would break. Maybe worse. Ramona made a decision in the space between heartbeats. She twisted her body, putting herself between Brennan and the rock, and took the impact on her left shoulder. Pain exploded through her arm, white-hot and absolute. She heard herself cry out, heard Brennan shouting something in her ear, but she did not let the current take her. Her right hand found a crack in the rock face, fingers jamming into the gap, holding them in place against the force of the flood. The narrows were 10 feet away. The walls had closed to less than 8 feet apart, and she could see handholds on both sides, roots and cracks and ledges that meant salvation. Move, she gasped at Brennan. Climb over me. Get to the wall. He hesitated. Now, soldier. That is an order. Brennan released his grip and scrambled over her body, using her as a bridge between the rock and the wall. His boots pressed against her back, her injured shoulder screaming in protest, and then he was on the wall, climbing, pulling himself out of the water's reach. Ramona let go of the rock. The current grabbed her immediately, but she was ready for it now, already swimming for the opposite wall. 3 strokes. 2. Her hand closed around an exposed root, and she hauled herself up, water streaming from her uniform, her rifle still slung across her back. She climbed until she was 6 feet above the flood, then stopped and pressed her forehead against the cool stone. Her shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat. Her lungs burned. Her muscles felt like they had been filled with sand. But Brennan was alive. She was alive, and her rifle had never touched the water. Across the narrow gap, Brennan clung to the wall and stared at her with something like awe. "Sergeant," he said, "you just—" Ramona lifted her head and managed something that was almost a smile. "I just did my job," she said. "Now we need to get back to the others." From upstream, she heard shouting. The rest of the patrol had seen what happened. They were moving along the walls, working their way toward the narrows, toward the 2 soldiers who had ridden the flood and survived. Ramona looked down at the water still raging below and allowed herself one moment of something that felt almost like triumph. Then she started climbing. The patrol reunited on a wide ledge where the wadi walls had eroded into a natural shelf. Ramona pulled herself onto the flat surface and lay on her back, staring at the gray sky while her shoulder pulsed with pain. Around her, soldiers were collapsing onto the rock, gasping, shaking, some of them laughing with the hysteria that comes after survival. Yusuf was at her side within seconds, his medic bag somehow still attached to his vest. "Let me see that shoulder," he said. "It is fine. It is not fine. I saw you hit that rock. Let me see it." Ramona sat up slowly and allowed him to probe the joint. The pain made her vision blur, but she kept her face neutral. 15 years of soldiering had taught her how to hide weakness, even when weakness was all she had left. "Not dislocated," Yusuf announced. "Probably a deep bone bruise, maybe a hairline fracture. You need x-rays when we get back." "When we get back," Ramona repeated. She looked at the water still churning below, slightly lower now, but still deadly. When is the question? Brennan had made his way to the ledge with help from Torvik, who had climbed down from his higher position to assist. The specialist sat with his back against the wall, his face pale, but his breathing steady. "Sergeant O'Yelleran," he said, "I do not know how to thank you. You can thank me by not making me do that again." A few soldiers laughed, the tension breaking slightly. Ramona allowed herself a small smile before turning to assess their situation. The ledge was large enough to hold all 12 of them with room to spare. They were perhaps 100 meters downstream from where the flood had hit, in a section of wadi that was wider and less treacherous. The walls here had more handholds, more options for movement once the water receded enough to allow it. Lieutenant Pemberton limped toward her, his twisted ankle apparently aggravated by the scramble along the walls. He lowered himself onto the rock beside her and was quiet for a long moment. "I should have listened to you," he finally said, "when you told me to exit the wadi. You were right, and I almost got us all killed." Ramona considered several responses and chose the most honest one. "Yes, sir. You should have listened. But you made a decision based on incomplete information and pressure from above. That is what command is. Now you know better for next time." Pemberton nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. His eyes moved to her shoulder, to the way she was holding her arm slightly away from her body. "You saved Brennan. That swim was impossible." "Apparently not." The lieutenant almost smiled. "Where did you learn to swim like that?" Ramona was quiet for a moment, memories surfacing that she usually kept buried. "Houston," she said. "I grew up 10 minutes from a public pool. My mother worked double shifts as a nurse, so she would drop me at the pool before dawn and pick me up after dark. It was free childcare, and I turned out to be good at it." "Good is an understatement," Yusuf said from nearby. "I was going to swim for the University of Texas. Had a scholarship offer and everything. Then my father lost his job, and we needed income. The Army offered a signing bonus and steady pay." She shrugged with her good shoulder. "Swimming does not pay bills. Soldiering does." The patrol had gathered closer, listening. Even Melik had worked his way to the edge of the group, his expression unreadable. Ramona felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with the flood. She had kept this part of herself hidden for 15 years, compartmentalized away from the soldier she had become. Revealing it now felt like removing armor in the middle of a battlefield. But these soldiers had just survived something together. They had earned a piece of her truth. Sergeant Cross shifted his position, grimacing at his injured ankle. "So you gave up the Olympics for the Army. Any regrets?" Ramona thought about the question seriously. The Olympics were never guaranteed. I was fast, but there were girls faster. The Army was a sure thing, a way to take care of my family. She paused. "And I have done things in uniform that matter more than any medal. I have led soldiers. I have brought them home alive. That counts for something." "It counts for everything," Torvik said quietly. The young private was looking at her with something like reverence. She had saved his life twice today, once from the heat and once from his own weak swimming when she positioned him near the wall before the flood hit. He would carry those debts for the rest of his service. "The water is dropping," Pemberton observed, peering over the edge of the ledge. "Another foot at least since we got here." Ramona looked. He was right. The flood was receding faster than she expected, the surge passing through the wadi system on its way to lower ground. In another hour, maybe less, the water would be shallow enough to move through. They could make their way back upstream to the extraction point and call for pickup. But something was bothering her, a number that did not add up. She counted heads again. 12 soldiers on the ledge. Pemberton, Cross, Yusuf, Torvik, Brennan, Melik, herself. 5 others whose names she ran through quickly. 12, all accounted for. Then why did she feel like something was wrong? The answer came to her slowly, rising from the fog of exhaustion and pain. When she had counted heads after the initial flood hit, hanging on the wall before she spotted Brennan, there had been 11 voices. 11 soldiers plus Brennan made 12. But Cross had been one of those 11. She had pulled him to the wall herself before the water came, which meant someone else had been missing too. Someone she had not noticed in the chaos. Someone who had answered the sound off, but might not have been telling the truth. Ramona's eyes swept the group again, looking for injuries she might have missed, for soldiers who were too quiet, too still. Her gaze stopped on Melik. He was sitting apart from the others, his back against the wall, his arms wrapped around his knees. His uniform was soaked like everyone else. His face was pale like everyone else. But his hands were shaking in a way that had nothing to do with cold. And there was blood seeping through the fabric of his pants, just above the knee. "Melik," Ramona said, "show me your leg." The staff sergeant's head snapped up, his eyes meeting hers with a flash of defiance. "It is nothing." Scraped it on the wall, climbing up. Ramona was already moving toward him, ignoring the protest from her shoulder. The blood soaking through his pants was too dark, too steady to be a scrape. She had seen enough combat injuries to know the difference. "Yusuf," she called without looking back. "Get over here." "I said it is nothing." Melik tried to shift away from her, but the ledge did not offer much room to retreat. His face twisted with pain at the movement, betraying what his words tried to hide. Ramona knelt beside him and put her hand on his arm. Not restraining, just present. "Staff Sergeant Melik, show me the wound, or I will have Yusuf cut your pants off. Your choice." Something shifted in Melik's expression. The defiance cracked, revealing something raw underneath. Something that looked almost like shame. He slowly extended his leg. Yusuf arrived with his medical kit and immediately went to work, pulling a knife to slice the fabric away from the wound. What he revealed made him suck in a sharp breath. A piece of metal, jagged and rust-colored, was embedded in Melik's thigh. It had entered at an angle, burying itself deep in the muscle. Blood welled around the edges, not spurting, but flowing with a steady insistence that spoke of serious damage. "Debris," Melik said quietly. "When the flood hit, I was not high enough on the wall. Something in the water caught me." Ramona stared at him. "That was 20 minutes ago. You have been sitting here, bleeding out for 20 minutes, and you did not say anything." Melik's jaw tightened. "We had bigger problems. Brennan was in the water. You were in the water. Cross has a broken ankle. I was not going to whine about a cut while you were out there saving lives." The words hung in the air between them. Ramona heard what he was not saying, heard the admission buried beneath the deflection. He had watched her swim into certain death for a soldier she barely knew. He had watched her take a rock impact to shield Brennan with her own body. And somewhere in that watching, something had changed. "This is not a cut," Yusuf said, his voice tight with professional concern. "This is a puncture wound with an embedded foreign object. I cannot remove it here without risking arterial damage. He needs surgery." "How long can he wait?" Ramona asked. Yusuf hesitated. "If I pack it and keep pressure on, maybe 2 hours. After that, infection risk goes up significantly. And if the metal shifts and nicks the femoral artery, he bleeds out in minutes." Ramona looked at the water, still flowing below the ledge. Lower than before, but still waist-deep in the main channel. Still moving fast enough to knock a healthy soldier off their feet. Moving a wounded man through that was risky. Waiting for it to drop further was also risky. There were no good options. There were only options. She turned to Pemberton. "Sir, we need to move as soon as possible. Melik cannot wait for full extraction. We need to get him to a point where a helicopter can reach us." Pemberton nodded, his face pale but determined. "The Wadi mouth is about 1 kilometer downstream. Open ground there. A bird could land." "Downstream," Ramona repeated. "Through the water. It is the shortest route. Going back upstream means climbing over terrain with 2 injured soldiers." The lieutenant looked across, who was testing his ankle with a grimace. "Make that 2.5 injured soldiers." Ramona calculated. The water would be shallower downstream as the wadi widened. The current would be slower. If they moved as a unit, keeping the wounded supported between stronger soldiers, they could make it. But she was asking exhausted men to walk into the same water that had nearly killed them an hour ago. She was asking them to trust that the flood would not surge again, that the mountains had finished sending their rain downhill. She was asking them to trust her. "Sergeant O'Yelleran." Melik's voice was quiet, stripped of its usual edge. "I know I have not made things easy for you. The things I said, the way I acted after the promotion." He stopped, struggling with words that did not come naturally. I was wrong. About you. About everything. Ramona looked at him for a long moment. The man who had spent 3 weeks undermining her authority was now bleeding on a rock ledge, his career and possibly his life depending on the decision she made in the next hour. She could have said many things. She chose to say only one. We're going to get you home, Melik. All of us. That is what this unit does. She stood and faced the patrol, 10 soldiers looking at her with exhaustion and fear and something else. Something that looked like faith. Listen up. We are moving downstream to the wadi mouth for helicopter extraction. The water is dropping, but it is still dangerous. We move as a team. We stay connected. We do not leave anyone behind. She paused, letting the words sink in. I know you're tired. I know you are scared. But we are not done yet. We finished this together. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Ramona turned to face the water that had tried to kill them, that was still trying to kill them, and began planning the route that would take them home. Behind her, she heard soldiers rising to their feet. She heard gear being checked and adjusted. She heard Yusuf giving Melik instructions about keeping pressure on his wound. And beneath all of it, she heard the flood continuing to recede, the water surrendering ground inch by inch, as if the wadi itself had finally decided to let them go. They entered the water as a chain. Ramona went first, testing each step before committing her weight, feeling for the unstable ground beneath the murky current. The water reached her waist, colder than she expected, pulling at her legs with patient insistence. Behind her came Torvik and another soldier supporting Melik between them, keeping his wounded leg elevated as much as possible. Then Yusuf, then Brennan, then the rest of the patrol in a line that stretched back 30 meters. Pemberton brought up the rear despite his twisted ankle, insisting that officers did not lead from behind. One step at a time, Ramona called back. Do not rush. Feel the ground before you trust it. The wadi floor was treacherous, littered with debris the flood had deposited. Rocks shifted underfoot. Branches grabbed at ankles. Twice in the first 50 meters, soldiers stumbled and had to be caught by those beside them. But nobody fell. Nobody went under. The chain held. Ramona kept her rifle high, the weapon resting across her shoulders with her hands gripping barrel and stock. The water occasionally surged above her waist, splashing toward the action, but she adjusted her stance each time, keeping the gun clear. She had carried this rifle through 4 deployments. It had saved her life more times than she could count. She was not going to lose it to a river. Sergeant O'Yelleran. Yusuf's voice carried forward through the line. Melik is getting pale. We need to move faster. Ramona looked back. The staff sergeant's face had gone gray, his jaw clenched against pain that must have been excruciating. Every step the soldiers took jostled his wounded leg, sent fresh waves of agony through his body. He was holding on through pure willpower, but willpower had limits. She turned forward again, searching for a faster route. The wadi was widening as they moved downstream, the walls spreading apart, the water growing shallower. Another 200 meters, and they would reach the mouth where the helicopter could land. 200 meters might as well be 200 miles if Melik bled out before they got there. Double time, she ordered. Keep the chain tight, but move faster. We are running out of time. The patrol surged forward, boots churning through the water, the pace increasing from careful walk to determined march. Ramona felt the current tugging harder as she moved faster, felt her footing grow less certain with each quickened step. But she also felt the water dropping. What had been waist deep was now thigh deep. What had been thigh deep was now knee deep. The flood was releasing its grip, draining away into the desert that would swallow it by nightfall. 100 meters to the wadi mouth. She could see the opening ahead, the walls falling away to reveal open ground and gray sky. A flat area of packed sand and gravel, perfect for a helicopter landing zone. 50 meters. Ramona felt something shift beneath her boot and threw her weight sideways just as the ground gave way. A sinkhole, created by the flood's erosion, opened where she had been standing. She caught herself on a submerged boulder, heart pounding, and looked back to warn the others. Sinkhole, she shouted. Move left. Stay against the wall. The patrol adjusted, the chain bending around the danger she had found. Soldiers pressed against the wadi wall, using handholds to steady themselves as they skirted the unstable ground. 20 meters. Ramona reached the edge of the flood zone, where the water finally gave way to wet sand. She hauled herself out of the current and turned to help the next soldier, reaching back to grip Torvik's hand and pull him onto solid ground. One by one, they emerged from the water. Brennan, Yusuf, Cross, limping badly but upright. The soldiers carrying Melik, their faces strained with effort. And finally Melik himself, lowered gently onto the sand, while Yusuf immediately went to work checking his wound. The patrol had made it. All 12 of them, battered and bleeding and exhausted, but alive. Ramona allowed herself 3 seconds to feel the relief. Then she was moving again, pulling the radio from Pemberton's pack, keying the frequency for battalion operations. Warhorse Main, this is Dagger 27. Requesting immediate medevac at grid coordinates to follow. We have 2 urgent surgical and multiple wounded. How copy? Static crackled. Then a voice, calm and professional, the sound of safety reaching across the distance. Dagger 27, Warhorse Main copies all. Medevac birds are spinning up. ETA to your position 30 minutes. Mark your LZ with smoke when you have visual. Copy 30 minutes. Ramona looked at Yusuf, who gave a tight nod. Melik could make it 30 minutes. Probably. We will be ready. Dagger 27 out. She set down the radio and moved to where Melik lay on the sand. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, but he was conscious. She could tell by the way his jaw kept tightening against the pain. 30 minutes, she told him. Birds are coming. Melik opened his eyes and looked at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Everything that had passed between them over the past 3 weeks, the resentment and the conflict and the bitter competition, seemed very small now. Very far away. Thank you, Melik said. The words came out rough, forced through pain and pride, but they were real. For not leaving me behind. For not letting any of us behind. Ramona looked at him, at this man who had tried to undermine her at every turn, who had whispered poison about her to anyone who would listen. She could have reminded him of all of it. She could have made him feel the weight of his mistakes. Instead, she reached down and squeezed his shoulder. That is what leaders do, she said quietly. We bring our people home. She stood and walked to the edge of the landing zone, her eyes scanning the southern sky for the helicopters that would carry them to safety. Behind her, she heard soldiers talking quietly, heard the bonds forming that only shared trauma could create. The Wadi had tried to kill them. It had failed. Now they just had to wait for the ride home. The Blackhawks appeared on the horizon like a promise kept. Ramona heard them before she saw them, the distinctive thump of rotors cutting through the desert air. She pulled the smoke grenade from her vest, popped the pin, and tossed it into the center of the landing zone. Purple smoke billowed upward, marking their position against the gray sky. Dagger 27, Warhorse Main. We have visual on your smoke. Inbound 60 seconds. Copy, Warhorse. LZ is cold. 2 litter urgent, 1 ambulatory wounded, 9 others stable. The helicopters banked toward them, 2 birds flying in formation, their profiles growing larger with each passing second. Ramona felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she had been carrying since the first drops of rain fell hours ago. Around her, soldiers were preparing for extraction. Cross had been helped to his feet, his arm draped over Torvik's shoulder for support. Brennan was standing on his own, pale but steady. Melik remained on the ground, Yusuf kneeling beside him, one hand pressed against the bandage on his thigh. The first Black Hawk touched down in a storm of dust and noise, its crew chief already jumping out with a litter. Ramona directed traffic with hand signals, pointing the medical crew toward Melik first, then toward Cross. Careful with the leg, Yusuf shouted over the rotor wash. Embedded foreign object, possible arterial involvement. The crew chief nodded and worked with practiced efficiency, sliding Melik onto the litter and carrying him toward the waiting helicopter. Cross limped after them with Torvik's help, hauling himself into the bird and collapsing onto the bench seat. The second Black Hawk landed moments later. Ramona began loading the remaining soldiers, counting heads as they climbed aboard. 8, 9, 10. Sergeant O'Yellerin. Pemberton was standing beside her, waiting. After you. Ramona shook her head. Officers first, sir. I will take the last seat. The lieutenant looked like he wanted to argue, but thought better of it. He climbed into the helicopter, leaving Ramona alone on the landing zone with the rotor wash whipping at her uniform. She took one last look at the wadi behind her. The water had dropped to ankle depth now, the flood reduced to a muddy stream that would disappear entirely within hours. The walls rose on either side, innocent and ancient, giving no sign of the violence they had witnessed. Somewhere in those walls, the debris pile that had saved Brennan was probably collapsing into the current. Somewhere upstream, the rocks that had nearly killed her were being polished smooth by the receding water. The wadi was erasing all evidence of what had happened, returning to the dry riverbed it had been before the rain came. But the soldiers who had survived it would remember. They would carry the water with them for the rest of their lives. Ramona climbed into the helicopter and pulled the door shut behind her. The crew chief gave a thumbs up to the pilots, and the Black Hawk lifted off, banking south toward FOB Sykes. She found a seat between Yusuf and Brennan, her back against the vibrating hull. Through the window, she watched the wadi shrink beneath them, becoming a thin brown line in the desert landscape, then disappearing entirely as they gained altitude. Sergeant, Brennan was leaning close, shouting over the engine noise. I never got to ask, how did you know the flood was coming? Before anyone else. Ramona considered the question. Because I have seen what water can do when people underestimate it. The specialist nodded slowly, processing her words. The person you lost, the one you mentioned before, was it something like this? Ramona's hand moved unconsciously to the waterproof case on her wrist. She had not spoken about Briggs to anyone outside the official reports. The grief was too private, too tangled with guilt to share. But Brennan had earned the truth. He had survived the same water that had taken Briggs. In some way, saving him had been a chance to rewrite history, to prove that she could keep her soldiers alive even when the current tried to claim them. His name was Corporal Antoine Briggs, she said. 2 years ago, river crossing in Afghanistan. The water looked calm, but there was a surge upstream we did not know about. He went under, and we never found him. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. I am sorry. Ramona looked at the case on her wrist, at the hard outline of the photograph inside. She thought about Briggs's smile, about his terrible jokes, about the letters he used to write to his grandmother every Sunday. She thought about the weight she had carried for 2 years, the conviction that she should have done something different, should have read the water better, should have kept him safe. I used to think I failed him, she said slowly. That I should have seen the danger, should have stopped the crossing. But some things are not about failure. Some things are just about the water being stronger than we are. Brennan considered this. But you beat the water today. You went into it on purpose and came out alive. Ramona allowed herself a small smile. I did not beat it. I just learned to move with it instead of against it. There is a difference. The helicopter continued south, carrying them toward medical care and hot food and the relative safety of the FOB. Through the window, Ramona could see the sun beginning to break through the clouds, golden light spilling across the desert. The storm was passing. The flood was over. And somewhere in her chest, a wound that had been bleeding for 2 years was finally beginning to close. FOB Sykes rose from the desert like a mirage made real. The Black Hawks descended toward the landing pad, and Ramona watched the familiar shapes of concrete barriers and guard towers grow larger through the window. Medical teams were already waiting on the ground, alerted by the radio calls, ready to receive the wounded. The first helicopter touched down, and the crew chief threw open the door. Melek was unloaded immediately, his litter carried at a run toward the aid station. Cross followed on a stretcher of his own, his ankle immobilized, his face drawn with exhaustion. Ramona's helicopter landed 30 seconds later. She waited until every soldier had dismounted before stepping onto the tarmac herself, her boots finding solid ground for the first time in hours. The FOB smelled like diesel and dust, and something cooking in the DFAC. It smelled like safety. Sergeant First Class O'Yellerin. She turned to find a major approaching, his uniform crisp despite the late hour, his rank insignia catching the fading light. She recognized him as Major Denton, the battalion executive officer, a man known for his attention to detail and his intolerance for excuses. Ramona straightened despite her exhaustion. "Yes, sir. I have been monitoring your radio traffic." The major's eyes moved across her mud-caked uniform, her injured shoulder, the rifle still slung across her back. "I want a full debrief in 1 hour. But first I want to know one thing. Sir, Lieutenant Pemberton's initial report indicates that you recommended exiting the wadi before the flood hit. Is that accurate?" Ramona hesitated only briefly. "Yes, sir. I identified weather indicators that suggested flash flood risk and recommended an alternate route. And Lieutenant Pemberton chose to continue the mission. Sir, the lieutenant made a command decision based on mission requirements and time constraints. The conditions were ambiguous. It was not an unreasonable call." Major Denton studied her for a long moment. Most NCOs would use this opportunity to shift blame to a junior officer. "You're protecting him. I'm giving you an accurate assessment, sir." Lieutenant Pemberton made a judgment call. When conditions deteriorated, he adapted and supported my recommendations. He performed well under pressure. The major's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Very well. Get yourself to medical and have that shoulder looked at. Debrief at 1900. "Yes, sir." Denton turned and walked toward the Tactical Operations Center, his posture rigid with military precision. Ramona watched him go, wondering what would appear in the official reports, whose careers would be helped or hurt by the words typed into forms over the next few days. Sergeant O'Yellerin. Pemberton had appeared beside her, his ankle wrapped in an ACE bandage from the helicopter medic. His young face was troubled. "You did not have to do that," he said quietly. "Cover for me with the major. I made the wrong call. I should own that." Ramona turned to face him fully. "Sir, you made a call with incomplete information. That is what officers do. The important thing is what you did after the situation changed. You listened. You adapted. You helped get everyone out alive. But if I had listened to you in the first place, then you would have learned nothing." Ramona allowed herself a slight smile. "Now you know. Next time, when an experienced NCO tells you the weather looks wrong, you will pay attention. That lesson is worth more than any amount of blame." Pemberton was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. Finally he nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything." Ramona watched him limp away toward the aid station, a lieutenant who had entered the wadi one kind of officer and emerged another. The Army was full of moments like that, crucibles that burned away inexperience and left something harder behind. She made her way to the medical tent, where a tired-looking captain examined her shoulder, prodded the bruised flesh, and declared it badly contused, but not fractured. "Light duty for 2 weeks," he said. "No heavy lifting. Take ibuprofen for the pain." It was the kind of injury that would ache for months, that would remind her of this day every time she reached for something on a high shelf. She did not mind. Pain was just memory written in the body. After medical, she found her way to the small chapel near the center of the FOB. It was empty at this hour, a quiet space of folding chairs and a simple wooden altar. On one wall hung a board covered with photographs, a memorial to soldiers from the battalion who had not made it home. Ramona stood before the board, her eyes moving across the faces until she found the one she was looking for. Corporal Antoine Briggs smiled back at her from a photograph taken during better days. He was wearing his dress uniform, his beret angled perfectly, his eyes bright with the confidence of youth. She reached into the waterproof case on her wrist and withdrew the photograph she had carried for 2 years. It was smaller than the one on the wall, worn at the edges from handling, but it showed the same smile. "I cannot save you," she said quietly. "I have spent 2 years trying to figure out what I could have done differently, and I still do not have an answer. Maybe there is not one." She pressed the photograph against her chest. "But I saved one today. A specialist named Brennan who could not swim. The water tried to take him the way it took you, and I did not let it. That does not make us even. Nothing could make us even. But maybe it means something. She placed the small photograph on the ledge beneath the memorial board, leaning it against the wall where Briggs could see it. Rest easy, Antoine. I will keep bringing them home. She stood there for a long time, letting the silence wash over her, letting the weight she had carried finally begin to lift. 3 days later, Ramona stood outside the aid station waiting for Melik to be discharged. The surgery had gone well. The metal fragment had been removed without arterial damage, and the doctors expected a full recovery. He would be on light duty for 6 weeks, then physical therapy, then back to full status. The army had invested too much in training him to let a piece of debris end his career. The door opened and Melik emerged on crutches, his leg heavily bandaged, his face pale but alert. He stopped when he saw her waiting. Sergeant O'Yellerin. His voice carried none of the edge it had held for 3 weeks. I did not expect a welcoming committee. Ramona shrugged with her good shoulder. Wanted to make sure you made it out in one piece. Also wanted to give you this. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Melik took it awkwardly, balancing on one crutch while he tore the wrapping away. Inside was a unit coin, the kind soldiers exchanged as tokens of respect and shared experience. This one bore the insignia of the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagle, with the words Air Assault engraved around the edge. Melik stared at it. I do not understand. You saved my life in that wadi, Ramona said. When I was swimming back with Brennan, you were the one who spotted us. You called out the direction. If you had not been watching, if you had been too focused on your own wound to pay attention, we might have missed the handholds entirely. The staff sergeant shook his head slowly. That is not the same as what you did. You swam into a flood. You took a rock to the shoulder. You carried the specialist through water that should have killed you both. Leadership is not a competition, Melik. It is not about who does more or who gets more credit. It is about making sure everyone gets home. You contributed to that. The coin is earned. Melik turned the coin over in his hand, running his thumb across the engraved surface. Then he looked up at her with eyes that held something new, something that looked almost like respect. I owe you an apology, he said, for everything I said, everything I did to undermine you after the promotion. It was petty and it was wrong, and it could have gotten people killed. Ramona considered his words. It could have, but it did not. And now you know better. Melik nodded slowly. Now I know better. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 soldiers who had entered a wadi as enemies and emerged as something else. Not friends, perhaps. The history between them was too complicated for that. But no longer enemies. No longer fighting battles that did not matter. The coin stays with me, Melik said finally. And so does the lesson. Ramona extended her hand. He shifted his crutch and took it, his grip firm despite his injury. Welcome back to the unit, Staff Sergeant. She left him standing outside the aid station and walked across the FOB toward the DFAC. The morning sun was warm on her face, the sky clear and blue. No trace of the clouds that had nearly killed them 3 days before. Inside the dining facility, she found the rest of the patrol gathered at a long table. Torvik and Brennan sat side by side, trading jokes like old friends. Yusuf was reading a paperback novel between bites of scrambled eggs. Cross had his ankle propped on an empty chair, his crutches leaning against the wall behind him. Lieutenant Pemberton sat at the head of the table, looking more comfortable in his authority than he had before the flood. He nodded as Ramona approached. Sergeant O'Yellerin, join us. She grabbed a tray and filled it with food she did not taste, then took the empty seat beside Brennan. The specialist looked up and smiled. Sergeant, glad you could make it. Would not miss it. Pemberton cleared his throat, and the table fell quiet. I want to gather everyone before we get back to normal operations. What happened in that wadi is going to stay with all of us for a long time. We lost gear. We nearly lost lives. But we did not lose each other. He paused, his eyes moving around the table. That is because of leadership. Sergeant O'Yellerin saw the danger before any of us. She made the calls that kept us alive. And when one of us was trapped in the water, she went in after him without hesitation. He looked directly at Ramona. I am recommending you for the Soldier's Medal. It will not be enough to repay what you did, but it is a start. Ramona felt heat rise to her cheeks. Sir, I was just doing my job. Your job is to lead soldiers. Pemberton smiled. You did that and more. The table erupted in agreement, soldiers banging their fists against the surface in the traditional show of approval. Ramona let the noise wash over her, uncomfortable with the attention, but unable to deny the warmth spreading through her chest. When the noise subsided, Brennan leaned close. You know what I keep thinking about, he said quietly. That moment when you told me to hold on. When you said you would do the swimming, and my only job was not to let go. I have never trusted anyone that completely in my entire life. Ramona looked at him, at this young soldier who had nearly drowned in a desert flood and come out the other side changed. That is what we do, she said. We trust each other, even when the water is trying to tear us apart. She picked up her fork and began to eat, surrounded by the soldiers she had brought home. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when everything seemed impossible. Outside the DFAC windows, the Iraqi sun climbed higher into a cloudless sky. Somewhere to the north, the wadi was dry again, just another scar in the desert landscape, waiting for the next rain. But the soldiers who had survived it were no longer waiting for anything. They had already found what mattered most: each other.